When you get rid of that imagined audience, you become you, the real you, the one that, if there was actually an audience, would be the only version worth watching. Welcome to the Endlessly Elated podcast. I'm your host, Kathleen Pagan, founder of Endlessly Elated, cook, designer, storyteller, and soon-to-be author. But at heart, I'm a woman endlessly curious about what it means to live with intention. Week after week, we'll slow down, reflect, ask life's big questions, and uncover the lessons that help us live more thoughtfully. Hello, and welcome to today's episode. There's a question I've been sitting with lately after a conversation my husband and I had, one that feels simple on the surface, but I think gets so much more complicated the longer you think about it. Who's watching? Not in an abstract sense, and definitely not theoretically, but actually, who is paying attention to your life in the way you think they are? I think many of us live as though we're under constant observation, as if there's an invisible panel keeping track of our decisions, our contradictions, our transformations, as if the world is smaller than it actually is, and our choices matter more broadly than they actually do. We seem to organize our entire lives around this belief. We edit ourselves, rehearse conversations before we have them. I do mine in the shower. We justify changes we haven't even been asked to explain. We perform consistency for people who aren't even paying attention. And here's what I've come to understand. All of this is conditioning. This audience we so desperately want to impress is fiction. And it's not because people don't care about us, but because attention is fragmented, selective, and fleeting in ways we refuse to accept sometimes. The world feels small when we view it from the center of our own experience, but step outside that center for even a moment, and you realize how many lives are unfolding in parallel, in different rooms, different industries, different orbits. The truth is, we only register briefly, if that, in one another's peripheral vision before disappearing again. The other day, my husband mentioned Mr. Beast to me. This is the conversation we had. You might know who he is, or if you are anything like me, you don't, but he's the biggest YouTuber in the world. I'm talking about hundreds of millions of subscribers, 455 million and counting to be exact. He is more culturally relevant to entire generations than most celebrities, and yet I had absolutely no idea who he was. And you may say that I must live under a rock, but it actually proves my point. His world and mine just don't overlap. He exists in a context I don't occupy. His visibility is expansive within that context and completely irrelevant outside of it. So, if someone with that much attention can be completely unknown to us, what does that say about the scrutiny we've been assuming we're under? Because we aren't being watched, we are watching ourselves. I think relevance is never absolute. We are not universally visible. At best, we are occasionally relevant. Yet we convince ourselves we're permanently on display, that every choice we make is being cataloged and evaluated by an audience that spans context, that remembers everything, and that's waiting for us to contradict ourselves so they can say, "Ha, I knew it." But that audience doesn't exist. What does exist is the version that we've built in our minds, the one that watches us more closely than any real person ever could or has the time to, the one that never forgets, and the one that demands we remain legible, consistent, and worthy of approval at all times. The cost of living for that imagined audience is higher than the life it keeps us from living. The weight we give other people's attention is rarely proportional to the attention they're actually giving us. And I think once that illusion cracks, you're left with not convincing yourself that no one cares, but how much attention you think you're under is actually just the volume of your own self surveillance turned up so loudly it drowns out your reality. There was a period in my life, years actually, where I avoided being seen. And again, not theoretically, literally. If I were out in public and I saw someone I knew, I would cross the street. I'm embarrassed to say that, but it's true. I turn around, I pretend I hadn't noticed them. I declined invitations constantly. It was actually so exhausting. And when I couldn't avoid going somewhere, I'd spent the entire time braced for judgment, scanning the room for confirmation that I was being evaluated. During those years, there were maybe 3 or 4 photos of me. I'm talking about in total. Years of my life with almost no visual documentation because I just couldn't stand the idea of being looked at. I had gained a ton of weight, and yes, that was the visible part, but the weight wasn't really the problem. Yes, for my health, of course, but it's not what I'm talking about here. It simply became the evidence I used against myself. What actually collapsed was my sense of self worth, my confidence. And once that was gone, I started moving through life as if I needed to defend it. I became hyper aware of how I might be perceived. Like I said before, I rehearsed conversations in my head before I had them dozens, if not hundreds of times. I apologized for my body before anyone said a word about it, made self deprecating jokes, clearly not because they were funny, but because I wanted to name the thing that I thought everyone was thinking before they could say it themselves. I thought if I had addressed it first, maybe it wouldn't hurt as much. And I don't actually know if anyone was thinking about my body. I'd venture to say probably not. But I was thinking about it constantly. And so in my world, my imagined audience did too. That assumption, that damaging belief that I was the subject of everyone's private review, was more depleting than anything anyone could have actually said to me. For years, I convicted myself in a trial that never took place. I built the courtroom, I called the witnesses, I delivered the verdict, only to find out that no one was ever in the room. But here's what I realized is that the weight had just been the loudest symptom of something that had been there all along. Dare I admit, existing maybe since I was a little girl. Because even before I gained the weight, I was always second guessing myself, adjusting, performing for some invisible standard I thought I needed to meet. The weight gain just made the performance unbearable. It made that imagined courtroom feel inescapable. So, what actually needed shifting wasn't my body, it was learning to live without this audience I spent 40 something years conditioned to believe existed. And between the weight loss, life circumstances, moving, and a million other things I'm still processing, perhaps even age, somewhere in the accumulation of all of it, I realized this audience I'd been performing for wasn't thinking about me. I wasn't even so much relevant to them. I had never been. Because the hardest audience to outgrow is the one you've internalized. Instead, I think now most people were managing their own lives, worrying about their own flaws, and most likely doing the exact same thing I was, wondering what their imagined audience thought of them. And to realize that that audience wasn't real, but that the life I postponed was. So let me ask you something, and I want you to actually sit with it instead of answering reactively. When was the last time you made a decision without considering how it would be perceived? Not a small decision, a real one, something that mattered. When was the last time you said yes to something or no to something or changed your mind about something without first running it through the filter of, what will people think? I'm going to pause here. If you're listening on the free feed, this is where today's episode ends. What comes next is about learning to recognize when your life is being shaped by an audience that isn't real and what opens up once that illusion falls away. To continue, join me inside the subscriber space. You'll find the link in the show notes. Make sure to follow wherever you stream your podcasts, and if this resonated, share it with someone who might need to hear it too. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week.